Some people spend their entire lives searching for a miracle, never realizing that the greatest ones are usually hidden beneath ordinary grease and quiet dignity. The late afternoon sun bathed the small neighborhood garage in warm golden light as the familiar rhythm of air compressors, rattling wrenches, and country music drifting from an old radio blended into another ordinary workday on the south side of Chicago. Ethan Brooks wiped his hands on a faded blue shop towel before leaning over the engine of a family pickup truck that had carried 3 generations through countless miles of American roads. At 42 years old, he had repaired thousands of vehicles, but he still treated every engine with the same patience and respect. Across the street, traffic slowed as an unmistakable silver Porsche glided toward the garage with effortless elegance before stopping near the entrance. Its polished body reflected the afternoon sunlight like liquid silver, drawing curious glances from every customer waiting for routine repairs. The driver's door opened, and Emily Carter stepped out wearing a perfectly tailored cream business suit that seemed entirely out of place among oil stains, toolboxes, and concrete floors. Her confident stride announced success long before anyone recognized the billionaire chief executive whose face often appeared on business magazine covers. She glanced around the modest garage before removing her sunglasses with a playful smile. "I have heard this place has the best mechanic in Chicago," she said. One of the younger technicians grinned proudly and pointed toward Ethan, who remained focused on tightening the final bolt beneath the truck's hood. Emily walked closer, while several customers quietly watched with growing curiosity. "My Porsche has developed a strange engine problem," she continued. "The dealership could not solve it." Ethan calmly nodded. "I will take a look." Emily studied the aging garage, the weathered walls, and the simple equipment before laughing softly. "Tell you what," she joked loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "If you fix my Porsche today, I will marry you." The garage erupted with cheerful laughter. Someone whistled. Another customer clapped, once against the fender of his truck. Even a delivery driver paused long enough to smile at the unexpected joke. Ethan never laughed. He never looked embarrassed. He simply opened the Porsche's hood with steady hands and quietly began inspecting the engine compartment as though no one had spoken at all. That silence slowly became louder than the laughter around him. Emily watched with mild surprise. Most people reacted to her wealth or her humor. This mechanic reacted only to the machine in front of him. His eyes moved carefully across every component, following fuel lines, electrical connectors, factory markings, and the smallest mechanical details with remarkable precision. Several minutes passed without a single unnecessary word. Then something caught his attention. One rivet near the rear firewall looked different from every other factory fastener surrounding it. It was older, installed with extraordinary care, yet did not belong. Ethan reached into his toolbox, selected a narrow inspection light, and leaned closer. Hidden beneath a protective panel was a nearly invisible compartment that could not be seen without removing part of the engine cover. Emily stepped forward, her confident smile fading into genuine curiosity. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Ethan did not answer immediately. He carefully loosened the concealed panel until it lifted just enough to reveal a small waterproof leather pouch tucked securely inside a space no ordinary inspection would ever discover. Every sound inside the garage seemed to disappear at once. The laughter was gone. Even the old radio suddenly felt distant. Ethan gently removed the pouch without opening it and looked toward Emily with the same calm expression he had worn since she arrived. "I believe," he said softly, "this belongs to you." Emily accepted the small leather pouch with both hands, but she did not open it. Her confident smile had completely disappeared, replaced by the quiet uncertainty of someone holding a piece of her own past without understanding how it had found its way back. The customers who had gathered around the Porsche slowly returned to their own conversations, sensing that whatever had just happened no longer belonged to curious strangers. Ethan gently lowered the hood of the Porsche before wiping his hands on a clean shop towel. "I still need to inspect the engine," he said calmly. "The problem that brought you here has not gone away." Emily looked at him with visible surprise. "You are not curious?" she asked. Ethan smiled politely. Curiosity and respect are not always the same thing. Without another question, he rolled his diagnostic cart beside the car and began connecting his equipment. Emily stood silently beside the vehicle for a long moment before walking toward the small office at the front of the garage. Inside, the room reflected a life built through quiet perseverance rather than luxury. A faded American flag hung neatly beside an old calendar. Family photographs covered one wall. A shelf held automotive manuals worn smooth by years of careful use. On the corner of a modest wooden desk sat a framed photograph of a smiling woman standing beside Ethan and a little girl holding melting ice cream cones during what looked like a summer county fair. Emily's attention lingered on the photograph just as the office door opened. "Dad," a cheerful young voice called. A 10-year-old girl stepped inside, carrying a backpack almost as large as herself. She stopped when she noticed the unfamiliar visitor. "Oh, saw the—" Emily smiled warmly. "You must be Lily." The little girl nodded politely. "Yes, ma'am. Please call me Emily." Lily smiled before placing her backpack on a chair. "Dad is outside fixing another car. He always says people should never have to worry while they are waiting." Emily glanced toward the window, where Ethan continued working beneath the raised hood of the Porsche with complete concentration. "Does he always work this hard?" Lily laughed softly. "Every day. He says every family depends on someone getting home safely." Emily looked around the office once more and noticed another photograph showing Ethan proudly helping Lily assemble a small model bridge for a school science project. There were no expensive decorations, no awards displayed to impress visitors, only simple reminders of a father who had quietly built his world around one little girl. Outside, Ethan carefully traced the unusual engine fault that had puzzled an authorized dealership for weeks. Instead of replacing expensive components, he patiently followed every sensor reading until one tiny connector hidden beneath a protective heat shield revealed a barely visible manufacturing defect. It was the kind of problem that only appeared after years of vibration and changing temperatures. He replaced the inexpensive connector, reset the vehicle's control system, and started the engine once more. The flat six engine settled into a smooth, confident rhythm. Emily stepped outside as the familiar sound echoed through the garage. "That is it?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Sometimes the smallest parts create the biggest problems." Emily looked down at the unopened leather pouch, still resting securely in her hands before looking back at the quiet mechanic. Somehow his words no longer sounded like they were only about an automobile. For the first time in many years, she began to wonder if the greatest thing she had discovered that afternoon was not hidden inside her father's Porsche at all, but standing quietly in front of it. Emily remained beside the Porsche long after the engine had returned to a perfect rhythm. The afternoon light had shifted lower across the garage floor, casting long golden shadows between the tool cabinets and parked vehicles. The small leather pouch rested in her hand, yet it felt heavier than anything she had carried before. She had spent years making decisions worth millions of dollars, sitting across from investors, executives, and advisors who carefully measured every word they spoke. But standing inside a neighborhood repair shop, she found herself uncertain about the one decision that seemed most personal. "Who put this inside my car?" she finally asked. Ethan closed his toolbox and looked toward the Porsche. "I do not know." "And you did not open it?" she asked. He shook his head. "No." Emily studied him carefully. "Not even a little curious?" Ethan smiled slightly. "Of course I was curious. Everyone would be. But curiosity does not give me permission." Those simple words stayed with her. In her world, information was power. People paid enormous amounts of money for access, secrets, and advantages. Yet this man had discovered something valuable and immediately placed it back into her hands without knowing whether it could change his own life. Emily looked at the pouch again. "You realize there could be something important inside." Ethan nodded. "That is why I did not open it." The answer was so simple that it almost surprised her. Before she could respond, Lily walked back from the office carrying 2 paper cups of lemonade. "Dad, I made an extra one." Ethan accepted the cup with a grateful smile, before Lily offered the second one to Emily. "You can have this if you want." Emily looked at the lemonade, then at the young girl standing beside her. It was a small gesture, but it carried the kind of warmth she rarely experienced in her executive world. "Thank you, Lily." She accepted the cup and took a small sip. For a moment, she was not a billionaire CEO. She was simply a woman standing in a quiet garage, sharing a drink with a family that had welcomed her without asking what she could offer in return. As the afternoon continued, Ethan finished documenting the Porsche repair. He printed the invoice and placed it on the counter. Emily reached into her handbag and prepared to pay, but when she saw the amount, she paused. It was less than she expected. Much less. "That cannot be correct," she said. Ethan looked at the invoice. "It is correct. You repaired a Porsche that several specialists could not fix." Ethan shrugged gently. It was a connector and a calibration issue. The work was not as complicated as people thought. Emily looked at him with disbelief. She had spent her life around people who knew how to increase the value of every situation. Ethan seemed determined to keep value exactly where it belonged. She paid the invoice, then placed the leather pouch carefully into her handbag. Before leaving, she stopped near the garage entrance. Most people would have opened that pouch. Ethan looked toward the fading sunlight outside. "Maybe, but I would rather sleep peacefully knowing I did the right thing." Emily had heard thousands of impressive speeches throughout her career. None had stayed with her like that sentence. She walked back to the Porsche, but before starting the engine, she looked once more at the small garage, the father and daughter standing together, and a man who had treated a stranger with more respect than many people showed their closest friends. She drove away carrying the hidden mystery with her, but she also carried a new question that followed her all the way home. What kind of person chooses honesty when nobody would ever know? Emily arrived home just after sunset, but for the first time in years, the walls of her luxury apartment felt unusually quiet. The city lights stretched across the windows of her high-rise residence, reflecting the success she had spent her entire adult life building. Normally, she would have reviewed financial reports, answered messages from executives, or prepared for another demanding week. Instead, she placed the leather pouch from the Porsche on her dining table and simply stared at it. The small object represented a mystery, but it also represented something she had almost forgotten existed. Trust. She carefully opened the pouch for the first time. Inside were 3 items protected with incredible care. A small brass key engraved with the number 74, a black flash drive with no label, and a handwritten envelope bearing a name she had not seen written in years. Her father's handwriting. Emily sat down slowly. Richard Carter had been the person who taught her everything about engineering, leadership, and perseverance. He had also been the person who reminded her that success meant little if it cost her integrity. She touched the envelope gently before opening it. Inside was a single page written in his familiar handwriting. "Emily, if you are reading this, then someone honest has found what I left behind. Do not trust the person who demands recognition. Trust the person who expects nothing." She stopped reading for a moment. The words immediately brought Ethan's face back into her mind. The mechanic who refused to look inside. The man who repaired her car without caring about her wealth. The person who had every reason to take advantage and chose not to. She continued reading. "The key opens a safety deposit box at First National Trust. The information inside is important, but the person who returns this message may be even more important. Character is revealed when nobody is watching." Emily leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed by the meaning behind her father's final message. The next morning, she drove to First National Trust before arriving at her company's headquarters. The historic bank building stood in the center of downtown Chicago, surrounded by busy streets and people rushing toward their daily responsibilities. Inside, a vault manager verified her identity before guiding her to a private area containing hundreds of small metal boxes. Number 74 waited quietly at the end of the row. The brass key turned smoothly. Inside were several documents, an old leather notebook, and another sealed envelope. Emily opened the notebook first. Page after page contained her father's handwritten observations about the company he had built. Engineering decisions, leadership concerns, Private reflections. As she continued reading, a troubling pattern began to appear. Richard had noticed that someone within the company leadership had been making choices that slowly moved the business away from its original values. He had recorded facts carefully, never with anger, never with accusations. He had simply preserved the truth. The final pages contained one sentence underlined twice. A company does not lose its way because of one bad decision. It loses its way when good people stop asking difficult questions. Emily closed the notebook and looked through the glass window of the bank office toward the city outside. For years, she believed protecting her father's legacy meant maintaining the company exactly as he left it. Now she understood something different. Protecting a legacy did not mean protecting comfort. It meant protecting truth. She placed the documents back into the folder and held the sealed envelope in her hand. Before opening it, she remembered Ethan standing inside that small garage, refusing even the smallest temptation. The discovery hidden inside the Porsche was no longer just about her father's secret. It was about the one person who had unknowingly passed the first test. The sealed envelope remained on Emily's desk for nearly an hour before she finally opened it. Outside her office window, Chicago moved with its usual energy. Cars traveled through crowded streets. People hurried between buildings, and the world continued as if nothing had changed. But inside the quiet office, Emily felt like she was standing at the beginning of a path she could not yet see. She carefully unfolded the letter and immediately recognized her father's handwriting. Emily, if you have reached this point, then you have already met someone who understands something money cannot teach. She paused. The sentence felt impossible to ignore. Richard Carter continued. The documents inside this box explain mistakes, risks, and choices made after I became ill. But before you make any decisions, remember this. The person who returned what was hidden without knowing its value has already shown more leadership than many people who sit in powerful offices. Emily lowered the letter slowly. She thought about the garage, the worn tools, the old coffee machine, the mechanic who never once asked about her company or her bank account. The next morning, she returned to the small repair shop. Ethan was already working when the silver Porsche appeared outside. He looked up from replacing a brake component on another customer's vehicle and smiled politely. Good morning. Is there another issue with the car? Emily stepped out, holding a simple folder instead of a designer handbag. No, the car is fine. Ethan nodded. Then how can I help you? Emily walked closer and placed the folder on the workbench. I want to thank you properly. Ethan looked at the folder, but did not touch it. You already paid for the repair. She smiled slightly. This is not for the repair. Inside the folder was an offer. A financial reward large enough to change most people's lives. A number that represented months, even years, of security for a small business owner. Ethan read the first page, then quietly closed the folder. I appreciate the gesture, but I cannot accept this. Emily looked surprised. Why? Ethan glanced around the garage before answering. Because I did not do anything extraordinary. I found something that belonged to you, and I returned it. Most people would not have done that. Ethan gave a small smile. Maybe that is true, but I am responsible for the choices I make, not the choices other people might make. Once again, Emily found herself without an answer. She was surrounded every day by talented people who knew how to negotiate, calculate, and create advantages. Yet Ethan seemed to measure success by a completely different standard. Before leaving, Emily noticed Lily sitting at the office desk working on a school assignment. A small model engine rested beside her notebook. Are you building that yourself? Emily asked. Lily nodded proudly. I want to design cars someday. Emily smiled. Your father must be proud. Lily looked toward Ethan. He always says the best inventions start with people who care about solving problems. Those words stayed with Emily after she left the garage. Later that afternoon, she returned to Carter Automotive Technologies and entered the executive conference room. The company leaders expected another routine meeting. Instead, Emily placed the documents from the safety deposit box on the table. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse anyone. She simply began asking questions based on the records her father had left behind. Slowly, the room changed. Confident expressions became thoughtful. Casual conversations became silence. The truth was no longer hidden behind polished presentations or impressive titles. It was sitting in front of everyone on the table. And somewhere in a small garage across the city, Ethan Brooks continued repairing ordinary cars, unaware that his simple decision to do the right thing had just begun changing the future of one of America's largest automotive companies. The executive conference room remained unusually quiet after Emily placed her father's documents on the long walnut table. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline continued shining beneath the afternoon sun, but inside the room, the atmosphere had completely changed. The people who once filled the space with confident opinions now carefully studied every page in front of them. Emily sat at the head of the table, not as someone seeking control, but as someone determined to protect the values her father had built into the company. Daniel Mercer, the senior executive who had guided many major decisions over the years, adjusted his glasses while reviewing the documents. "These records are incomplete," he finally said. His voice remained calm, but the certainty behind it had weakened. Emily looked at him steadily. "That is interesting, because these notes were written by my father, and every date matches the project history recorded in our archives." A few board members exchanged quiet glances. Nobody wanted conflict. Nobody wanted accusations. But everyone wanted the truth. Emily opened the leather notebook and turned to the pages where Richard Carter had documented concerns about certain financial choices and engineering decisions. Her father's writing was careful, professional, and precise. He never attacked anyone personally. He simply recorded what he saw. That was what made the information impossible to dismiss. "My father spent his life building this company around trust," Emily said. "He believed numbers mattered, but he believed people mattered more." Daniel looked down at the documents again. For years, he had been one of the most respected people inside the company. He had always appeared loyal, always offered solutions, and always knew exactly what to say in difficult meetings. But now the room was filled with a different kind of silence. The kind that appears when carefully prepared explanations no longer match the facts. Emily reached for the black flash drive that had been hidden inside the Porsche. She connected it to the conference room screen. Everyone watched as the final message from Richard Carter appeared. His familiar face filled the large display. The room became completely still. "If you are watching this," Richard said, "then someone honest has returned what I left behind. Before you make any decisions, remember this. A company does not lose its purpose because of one mistake. It loses its purpose when people stop caring enough to correct mistakes." The executives listened carefully as Richard continued. "Leadership is not about protecting your position. It is about protecting the people who trust you." The video ended. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Emily looked around the room and allowed the silence to remain. She did not need to force anyone to understand. The truth had already done that. After the meeting, the board members voted to begin an independent review of past decisions and temporarily remove Daniel from his leadership responsibilities while the investigation continued. There was no celebration, no public humiliation, and no dramatic confrontation. Only accountability. Later that evening, Emily returned to the garage. The lights were still on, and Ethan was finishing a repair on an old family vehicle. He looked surprised when he saw her. "Everything okay?" he asked. Emily smiled softly. "For the first time in a long time, I think it will be." She looked around the garage, remembering the moment everything began. "My father was right about you." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Your father knew about me?" Emily shook her head with a gentle smile. "No, but he knew the kind of person I needed to meet." Ethan returned her smile, unaware that the simple choice he made beside a Porsche had become the reason an entire company remembered what integrity truly meant. The days following the board meeting brought a quiet transformation to Carter Automotive Technologies. The company did not change because of a single announcement or a dramatic speech. It changed because people began asking different questions. Engineers started reviewing old designs with fresh attention. Managers returned to the original principles written in Richard Carter's earliest company notes. Employees who had worked there for decades felt something they had not felt in years: They felt that the company was listening again. Meanwhile, Ethan Brooks returned to his usual routine at the small garage on the edge of the city. He repaired brakes, replaced batteries, answered customer questions, and continued doing what he had always done. He never mentioned the documents. He never mentioned the company. He never told anyone that his simple decision had influenced one of the biggest changes in Carter Automotive Technology's history. To Ethan, honesty was not a special achievement. It was simply the way a person should live. One Saturday morning, Emily arrived at the garage again. This time, she was not wearing a formal business suit. She wore a simple jacket, jeans, and comfortable shoes. She carried no assistant, no schedule folder, and no company documents. Ethan looked up from a customer's truck and smiled. Another car problem? Emily smiled back. No, today I came as myself. He looked slightly surprised. Just yourself. She nodded. Just Emily. She walked toward the small office where Lily was organizing her science project materials. The young girl looked up and smiled. You came back. Emily laughed softly. I did. Lily proudly showed her a small model engine she had built from recycled parts. I want to create machines that help people someday. Emily examined the project carefully. She did not offer a quick compliment and move on. She asked questions. She listened. She encouraged the same curiosity that had once driven her own father. Ethan watched from the garage entrance and noticed something he had not expected. The woman who once seemed to measure everything by success was now taking time to appreciate a child's simple idea. Later that afternoon, Emily and Ethan sat outside the garage with 2 cups of coffee while the sun slowly moved behind the neighborhood buildings. The conversation was different from their first meeting. There were no jokes about wealth, no assumptions, no distance. Emily spoke about the pressure of leading a company and the loneliness that came with always needing to appear certain. Ethan spoke about raising Lily, rebuilding his life, and learning that some chapters and only so new ones can begin. You know, Emily said quietly, I used to think strength meant never needing anyone. Ethan looked toward the street where families walked by and children rode bicycles. Sometimes strength is knowing who deserve your trust. The word stayed with her. Before leaving, Emily placed a small envelope on the workbench. Ethan immediately looked concerned. What is that? She smiled. Not money, not a reward. He opened it carefully and found an invitation to Carter Automotive Technology's annual Founders Day celebration. My father believed people who protect a company's values should be honored, Emily explained. I would like you and Lily to be there. Ethan looked at the invitation, then toward his daughter, who was already smiling from the office doorway. For the first time, the world that had once separated them by wealth and status felt much smaller. Emily had entered the garage looking for a mechanic who could fix a car. Instead, she found someone who reminded her what true leadership looked like. The evening of the Founders Day celebration arrived with a gentle autumn breeze moving through the streets of Chicago. Inside the grand headquarters of Carter Automotive Technologies, hundreds of employees gathered beneath warm golden lights surrounded by historic vehicles, engineering displays, and photographs showing the company's journey from a small workshop into a respected American automotive leader. For most guests, it was an annual tradition. For Ethan Brooks and Lily, it was a moment they never expected to experience. Ethan adjusted the collar of his dark suit while standing near the entrance, feeling slightly out of place among executives, investors, and industry leaders. Lily, however, looked around with excitement as she admired the machines displayed throughout the building. Dad, look at that engine, she whispered. Imagine how many people work together to create something like that. Ethan smiled. That is what makes great things happen. People working together. Before he could say more, Emily approached them. Unlike the first day they met, there was no distance in her expression. No CEO standing above a mechanic. Only a person greeting 2 people who had become important in her life. I am really glad you came, she said. Lily smiled. Thank you for inviting us. Emily looked toward Ethan. I meant what I said. You belong here. Those words carried more meaning than she realized. Ethan had spent years believing his work mattered only inside the walls of his small garage. Tonight, he discovered that integrity could travel much farther than he imagined. As the event began, Emily stepped onto the stage in front of the gathered crowd. The room slowly became quiet as she looked across the audience of employees who had helped build her family's legacy. For many years, I believed leadership was about having the strongest voice in the room, she began. I believed success came from always knowing the answer. But I learned something important recently. Sometimes the greatest lessons come from people who never asked to be noticed. The audience listened carefully. Emily continued, "A person can own the most expensive things in the world and still miss what truly matters. Character cannot be purchased. Trust cannot be manufactured. And integrity cannot be replaced." She turned toward Ethan, standing near the front of the room. "Someone entered my life who reminded me that doing the right thing matters, even when nobody is watching." A respectful silence filled the atrium. Ethan looked uncomfortable with the attention, but Lily held his hand and smiled proudly. Emily invited them onto the stage. When Ethan reached the microphone, he looked across the crowd and spoke simply. "I do not think I did anything special. I just treated someone else's property the way I would want someone to treat mine." The simplicity of his words made the moment even more powerful. People often expected extraordinary stories to come from extraordinary actions. But sometimes the most meaningful moments came from ordinary choices made with honesty. After the ceremony, Emily presented Lily with a scholarship opportunity created through the Carter Foundation to support young engineers with curiosity and dedication. Lily held the certificate carefully, looking between Emily and her father with a smile too big to hide. Ethan thanked Emily quietly. "You did not have to do this." Emily shook her head. "Actually, I did. Because people like you remind everyone why these opportunities matter." Later that night, after the guests had left and the building became peaceful again, Ethan and Emily stood outside beside the silver Porsche that had connected their lives. The city lights reflected across the car's surface, but neither of them focused on the vehicle anymore. They understood that the greatest discovery had never been hidden inside the engine. It had been the realization that respect, kindness, and trust could bring two completely different worlds together. Several months passed after the Founders' Day celebration, but the memory of that evening remained with everyone who had witnessed it. At Carter Automotive Technologies, the company continued moving forward with a renewed sense of purpose. Employees no longer talked only about profits, growth, or competition. They talked about trust, responsibility, and the values that had guided Richard Carter when he first opened a small engineering workshop many years earlier. Across the city, Ethan Brooks continued waking up early, opening the garage doors, and welcoming customers with the same quiet smile he had always carried. Nothing about his routine changed. The same old coffee machine sat beside the office window. The same tools rested inside the same worn drawers. The same photograph of Lily and his late wife remained on the wall. Ethan never wanted recognition to change who he was. To him, being a good person was not something to display. It was simply something to practice every day. One peaceful Saturday morning, Emily arrived at the garage without the Porsche. She stepped out of a simple sedan, wearing a comfortable jacket and carrying a small paper bag from a local bakery. Ethan looked up from repairing a family vehicle and smiled. "No car trouble today?" Emily laughed softly. "No, today I brought breakfast." She placed the bag on the workbench and revealed fresh pastries and coffee. Ethan looked surprised. "You did not have to do that." Emily smiled. "I know. That is why I wanted to." They sat outside the garage as sunlight moved across the quiet neighborhood. The conversation felt completely different from their first meeting. There was no billionaire CEO and no struggling mechanic. There were simply two people who had learned something valuable from each other. Emily told Ethan about the changes happening inside the company. New engineers were being encouraged to share ideas. Young employees were receiving more opportunities. The culture Richard Carter wanted was finally returning. Ethan listened carefully before saying, "Your father would probably be proud." Emily looked down for a moment and smiled. "I think he would be proud because I finally understood what he was trying to teach me." She looked toward the garage where Lily was organizing her science materials. Success is not about having the most powerful position. It is about what you do with that position. Ethan nodded. Those words reminded him that people could change when they were given the chance to see beyond their own assumptions. Later that afternoon, Emily watched Lily explain her latest engineering idea using drawings spread across the garage table. The young girl described a future where vehicles could help communities and protect the environment. Emily listened with the same attention she would give a major company proposal. She recognized that curiosity, compassion, and imagination were the foundations of every great invention. Before leaving, Emily walked toward the silver Porsche parked nearby. She ran her hand lightly across the hood and smiled. "It is funny," she said. "I thought this car brought me here because it needed to be fixed." Ethan smiled. And now, Emily looked back at the garage, the tools, the family photographs, and the people who had changed her understanding of what truly mattered. "Now I think it brought me here because I needed to learn something." The evening sun painted the sky with soft orange and gold as the Porsche started quietly. Ethan and Emily stood beside the garage, no longer separated by wealth, titles, or expectations. The journey that began with a simple repair had become a reminder that kindness can cross every boundary. Some people search for greatness in expensive buildings, powerful positions, and public recognition. But sometimes greatness is found in a small garage, in a simple choice, and in a person who does the right thing even when nobody is watching. And that is why true dignity never needs to announce itself. It simply leaves a mark that time cannot erase.